Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Racial purity is the driving force of a regime that seeks to create a master race of fair-skinned, blue-eyed men, women, and children. Those who do not meet the criteria for pure blood are marked for extinction, their lives deemed worthless. As the horrors of the Third Reich intensified, the world stood helplessly by. Germany withdrew from the League of Nations. They would have no outside interference. Ultimately, this contempt kindled a global awareness that in the future, the world would need a forceful legal structure to stop assaults on human dignity. French jurist René Cassin was determined that the Nazi terror must never happen again.
C'est en 1933 quand la carence.
It was in 1933 when the failures of the League of Nations and the human will allowed Hitler to rise to power and to prosper, may I say, without anyone interfering. It was at that moment that we felt that the international world had to get involved in protecting human rights.
S'occupa de la protection des droits de l'homme.
As war raged in Europe, in his 1941 State of the Union address, President Franklin Roosevelt outlined his vision for a future world, the famous four freedoms.
First is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third, freedom from want. Fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armament everywhere in the world.
April 1945, World War II was ending. In Europe, the German army collapsed, and Adolf Hitler died by his own hand. One of the most profane nightmares in the history of the world was over. The sudden death of United States President Franklin Delano Roosevelt shocked the world. Soon thereafter, in San Francisco, California, representatives from all over the world arrived to bring one of his dreams to life. The demand for the dignity of everyone, everywhere, evolved into a simple yet eloquent two-word phrase: human rights. June 26, 1945, the San Francisco delegates approved the United Nations Charter. Human rights were mentioned 7 times. Not only that, the Charter established a Commission on Human Rights, a major step ensuring that the protection of individual liberties would be crucial in the post-war world. Eleanor Roosevelt, widow of the popular American president, was chosen to head the United Nations Human Rights Commission. She already had achieved worldwide fame as a compassionate defender of the needy and downtrodden everywhere. It is a testament to her international reputation that at a time when virtually no women held any positions of authority in the United Nations, She was appointed to chair the group that would undertake the drafting of the world's first Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 1947, Lake Success, not far from New York City. After months of intense preparation, the full Commission on Human Rights, with representatives of 18 nations, gathered for the first time. Eleanor Roosevelt introduces the delegates to the newsreel cameras. They are an extraordinary collection of philosophers, theorists, and diplomats.
For more than 10 minutes. I will begin on my right with the delegate from France, Professor René Cassin.
He took a leading part in the drafting. In fact, he saw himself as the principal drafter of the Declaration.
Next, the delegate from Chile, Honorable Monsieur Santa Cruz.
A good diplomat and also a very energetic person.
The delegate from China, who is also vice chairman of the committee, Dr. P.C. Chang.
He was always a rather calming influence. He would inject some apt philosophical comment if things were getting rather hot.
Our Assistant Secretary General, Monsieur Logier.
J'ai la chance de tomber sur un patron.
I was lucky to have a chief, Henri Logier, who was a fighter for democracy and internationalism. It was wonderful to work for him.
On my left, the committee secretary, Dr. Humphrey.
John Humphrey était pour nous un exemple merveilleux.
John Humphrey was for us an exemplary and conscientious worker. He had lost an arm, but he had the allure of a stately man. He was tall, he was handsome, and his empty sleeve always impressed the people around him.
The rapporteur of the committee and the delegate from Lebanon, Dr. Malik.
He was not easily pushed around, and he maintained his views as strongly as he could.
The delegate from the USSR, Professor Vladimir Koretsky. The delegate from the United Kingdom, Mr. Jeffrey Wilson.
These were the kind of people who would not let evil triumph. They had seen the worst, and they were determined to do their best to see that these sorts of things would not happen again.
In 1947, the norms we now hold dear were still a source of fierce debate, as the future UN Secretariat was being erected on the site of an abandoned New York City slaughterhouse. Legal experts and diplomats continued to hammer out the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. A law professor from Canada, John Humphrey, was in charge of gathering all the existing human rights documents he could lay his hands on. His staff solicited ideas from the world's great thinkers, among them Mahatma Gandhi, father of passive resistance, the British man of letters H.G. Wells, and Italian philosopher Benedetto Croce.
Humphrey did a marvelous job of assembling and systematizing a vast quantity of material. But it was Cassin who was able to turn that vast quantity of material into a coherent, organic document with an architecture, with themes, principles, interlocking parts. So each one, in a sense, was an author. Each one could say, in a sense, I was the author.
Starting with the opening words of the draft declaration's preamble, every syllable underwent relentless scrutiny. The first article, inspired by the American Declaration of Independence, stated that all men are created equal. Mrs. Hansa Mehta of India strongly objected. She felt that a declaration saying all men would be taken too literally. What's more, the Soviet Union objected to the religious implications of the verb created. In the end, the article was amended to read, "All human beings are born free and equal." During the endless debates, political and civil rights were easily accepted, but economic, social, and cultural rights caused a deep rift. In the fall of 1948, the UN General Assembly convened in Paris. Human rights high on its agenda. The keys to the Palais de Chaillot were presented to Secretary General Tryggvi. He would host the UN meeting there. By now, the proposed Declaration of Human Rights had been revised again and again. Here it would face its final hurdle, debate and vote before the full General Assembly. The principles that had guided all those who had toiled for years on the Declaration offered something for everyone. In this spirit, the document had been called an international declaration. René Cassin suggested that it be dubbed a universal declaration, embracing all of humanity.
The founders of the Universal Declaration believed that the right question is not whether it is an idea from such or such a country, but rather, is it a good idea? And is it a universal idea? Is it a universalizable idea? Every single one of the important actors in framing the Universal Declaration expected that these very general rights would take different forms of expression in different cultures.
Paris, 1948.
Finalement, le 10 décembre, la date fatidique était là.
At last, the 10th of December, the fatal day. And for all of us in the Secretariat who worked in this area, it was a very moving moment because we knew that most of the people were for it, but we wondered if there'd be a vote against. Maybe Saudi Arabia would vote against it, and would the Soviet Union vote for it or abstain?
Well, now I put the proposal to adopt as a whole the draft Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which paragraph by paragraph, article by article, has been adopted.
The delegates were there in front of us, and we were in the back, we who worked in the Secretariat. We tried to see who was voting and how, so it was also for me personally a very powerful moment.
In favor of adoption, 48. Against adoption, none. Abstentions, 8. So that we reach the stage, gentlemen, in which by an enormous vote and without any direct opposition, this Assembly has adopted this very important declaration.
With the passage of the Declaration, a brief moment to celebrate and congratulate, mindful that although much hard work remained, this new Human Rights Declaration was an important contribution to the world.
It was a great success, and this success continues to this day. This declaration, this text that was created in the course of just a few years, today it has a very powerful symbolic value. No government today dares to say that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is none of their business.